So I'm Dan McCarter, the president of the Santa Barbara Urban Creeks Council, and we have Lewis put together, Lewis, a board member, put together a nice this program with Jason White to talk about steelhead recovery in Santa Barbara County. So I'd like to turn this over to Lewis and begin the program.
Hi, everybody. I'm Louis Andaloro, the Vice President of the Board of Directors of the Santa Barbara Urban Creeks Council. And I just wanted to tell you about two exciting things. The first one is, Cora, if you could share the screen about the concert. And tomorrow night, Tuesday night on the 20th at 7:30, we're putting on a concert at Soho. You can go to our website, which is santabarbaraurbancreeks.org, and get all the information about tomorrow's concert. And if we can get the next slide, Cora. I just wanted to make a quick announcement that you have, here we go. We have our brand new Santa Barbara Urban Creeks Council bandana. It's so new, it's not even on the website yet. But you get one for free with every $10 donation. It's 100% cotton, and it has all the creeks in the South Coast watershed from Isla Vista to Carpinteria on a convenient map. So hopefully you'll need to get one of these. So now I'll turn it back over to Stephanie, who will introduce the speaker.
Great. So, okay, a little bit of roasting. So how do I know Jason? I know Jason because I teach rivers. Now I'll teach it continuously, but I used to teach it every 4 years. And because both my husband and an old friend, Derek Booth, and an old friend of the family, Tom Dunn, teach at Bren, they teach the watershed classes. I'm kind of like got the pipeline for the very best person to be the TA for my class. And you know, everybody agreed, like, Jason, you have to have Jason as your TA. And so this was, I don't know, what, four years ago, Jason, and 2018, I think. And of course they're right. Jason's like the most amazing TA, but what they didn't tell me is that all the girls would fall in love with him, and all the boys in the class wanted to be like him. And so one time Jason had sent me a note saying, God, tell everybody, like, I'm really sorry I can't be at lecture today and I'll really miss him. And so I said this, and this one girl bats her eyes and says breathlessly, like, oh, and we will miss him too. And then on field trips, every step that Jason took, that everybody in a row, like ducks, would follow behind him. Like if he leapt from a rock to rock, they'd leap right behind him, rock to rock. And I honestly, it was just so adorable. It was really cute. Anyway, Jason graduated and went to work for a former coworker of mine, Mo Gomez, who runs the South Coast Habitat Restoration Project, and they've been working together, doing great work in the local area, trying to restore our fish passage. And wow, I can't think of anybody that I'm more delighted to introduce than Jason. He's lovely.
Wow, very flattering stuff. Thank you for the introduction. I did not know about the flabbergasted, accents.
A little roast, yeah.
But yeah, it was really great to teach your class with you, and it was excellent part of the end of my grad school career. So I'm psyched that you are introducing me. So yes, I am. My name is Jason White. I'm a project manager for a nonprofit called South Coast Habitat Restoration, as Steph had alluded to. I went to UCSB graduate school at the Brent School. Prior to, I attended Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, both environmental degrees. The former at Brent was more water resource based. And then shortly after graduating Brent, I was able and lucky enough to garner the project manager position that had opened up at South Coast Habitat Restoration. So I'm one of the lucky few who got to stay local and live in this paradise that we call Santa Barbara. So I'm happy to be here and happy to explain kind of some of the things that are going on with creek restoration at large in the county and a couple specific projects that we're working on right now. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen and load this presentation. Let's see. All right. Slideshow. Okay. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Great. Okay. So my title of my talk today is Watershed Restoration Santa Barbara County. We're going to go through a few things. We're going to go kind of over what South Coast Habitat Restoration, SCHR for short, does. Some of the SB County watersheds that we've worked in, kind of going over our bread and butter, which is our stream migration barrier projects. And then we're going to dive into a couple projects in particular. One, work based in Carpinteria Creek. This slide is a little outdated. And then the second one, we're going to go into the Davy Brown Creek restoration project that we just completed this last winter. So about SCHR, we're a small nonprofit. It's just myself and the director, Mauricio Gomez, Mo Gomez, as you all may know him as. And what we do is wear a lot of hats, but essentially what we're trying to do is restore the creek. And that entails a lot of different things. For us, it requires us to communicate with landowners and ID landowners that have potential projects on their lands. These landowners can be both public and private entities. So it takes a different mindset when talking to all these different types of people. We then apply and manage grants. So we'll go after public funding, usually public funding. Sometimes we get private donations, but more or less, I would say 90–95% of our funds come from applying and obtaining grant monies from different agencies. And once we get that money, we coordinate with different consultants, whether that be engineers, biological specialists, or permitting specialists. However, we need to make the project happen and cut through the red tape. And that leads us to obtaining the permits. So me and Mo will act as a surrogate for landowners to the natural resource agencies. So we will typically apply for permits for our projects. And what that does is really allow landowners to feel a level of comfort, especially if they're not so much so comfortable with dealing with governmental organizations that have jurisdiction over certain types of things, whether it's resources or the creeks themselves. And then once we get all of our permits and our engineers to design something for us, we go ahead and hire a general contractor, the guy who's actually going to be in an excavator ripping up the creek and putting it all back together. And once that's complete, that's kind of like the end, hurrah, we made it. But then there's this idea of, it's not generally natural and fully restored at the end of the construction point. A lot of times these projects are revegetated, and as you guys all know, plants take a second to grow. So we, go in and we monitor the conditions that are either imposed upon us by agencies and the grants, or just out of our own will to understand what type of things worked and what didn't. And then kind of the last piece of what SCHR does is different types of community outreach and education. This would be a perfect example of what that would look like. So the SB County watersheds, this is just an image of, our general coastal plain, coastline, and then obviously our really, really steep mountains and small stream lengths that we deal with here in Santa Barbara County on the South Coast. really creates kind of a unique uh, dynamic for as it relates to the rest of the state and how their watersheds operate, because um, they are small watersheds. They are very debris flow driven as far as how their geomorphology works, and they're short stream lengths. But what's really interesting is we have a lot of them. So from Carpinteria all the way up, Carpinteria Creek all the way up to Point Conception, our south coast has a bunch of different watersheds, which creates one, a lot of work to be done, but two, a lot of refuge for different species up and down our coast. We do have some larger watersheds as well in our county, most namely the Santa Ynez watershed and the Santa Maria or the Sisquoc watershed, depending on how you look at it. But we'll talk about those in a sec. Again, just a general overview image of SB County watersheds. The Sisquoc River isn't shown on this, although it is in SB County. But all those little blue lines on the bottom portion of the screen, you can see just how many different creeks that we have. So why do we do this? Well, it's namely for the critters. While there's a bunch of different other co-benefits that creek restoration has, I would say the majority of our funding, if not all of our funding, is in the name of the steelhead trout. The southern steelhead is a federally endangered species. So with that comes a lot of protections, but also comes a lot of different grant opportunities to apply for money and then remediate what really is the biggest barrier for these fish, and no pun intended, but is in-stream barriers. We also have a lot of other little critters that are really important to our local watersheds. This is the California red-legged frog. The upper left, you can see it's an egg mass. So that when the frogs, they lay their eggs, they typically do it in slack water. So that's a picture of that. Then we have our tadpole up in the upper right, and then a couple in situ frogs there on the bottom. And again, there's some other critters as well, like our western pond turtles, and then our different newts and salamanders, and I think that's a skink, if I'm not mistaken, on the bottom left. But the steelhead trout, the biological kind of migration of these fish is similar to a salmon, except that a salmon dies when it returns to spawn in its natal stream, whereas the steelhead has the capability to continue to go in and out of the ocean multiple cycles in multiple years. So it's kind of this cool bifurcation of the two, where it's steelhead are just so hardy in the way that they keep charging. They go in, they come out, they go in, they come out. Whereas salmon, I'm sure you've all seen those pictures of dead salmon in the creek after they spawn. That's it for them. But one of the biggest barriers, or one of the biggest hurdles for southern steelhead trout is the number of barriers to migration. They spawn in their headwater streams, usually higher up in the watershed, taking some length of stream to get there. But when you have different forms of barriers, whether it's the dam, like the Matilaha Dam shown in here with the famous cut and paste scissors, or a channelized creek used for flood control, or even just roads on private lands that were built, who knows, back in the day, 50s, 60s, 70s, without any sort of thought about steelhead trout. So these barriers of migrations can exist in all sorts of forms. This is a debris basin, which we'll touch on and what that facility is in a second. But this is located on Carpinteria Creek. And again, a giant barrier to steelhead. There's no way a fish could make it up that culvert, even on the wettest of years. So here is a map of, our, Tri-County area, Ventura, SLO, Santa Barbara. There's Kern and LA in there too, but this is the number of barriers that exist on creeks in these areas. Quite stark, a lot of red dots. I'm gonna hit the slide now, and there's gonna be a little bit of a change. You probably didn't see it, but the change is right here. And we have these little green dots are barriers, former red barriers that have been remediated. So either taken out and restored or modified to allow for fish passage. This is a little bit outdated of a slide. There should be some more green dots, but it gives you a general idea. There's lots of work to be done. So just to kind of highlight what this work is and what can be done, and then what things can continue to be done, kind of want to highlight Carpentry Creek watershed as a little case study. And it's perfect timing because we are currently working on some projects in Carpentry Creek right now. So Carpentry Creek watershed, it's 15 square miles. That may sound small, but it's actually the third biggest watershed, if you discount Goleta Slough as one giant one, to Gaviota Creek and Halama Creek. So on our south coast, Carpentry Creek is big, small but big. There's about 35 miles of stream and about 15 miles of perennial flow. I'd argue that's probably a little less now, given some of the drought effects we've had. But there's excellent habitat in the basin, and there's at this point no migratory barriers in the entire watershed. And that's partly to Mo and South Coast Habitat Restoration and prior efforts to my involvement, as well as a few projects while I've been here as well. But this watershed is a true candidate for steelhead trout in the way that all migration barriers are eliminated, has great habitat, there's usually water, and there's been a lot of community support throughout the whole watershed to get steelhead trout back in this system. So this is an example of a barrier that has been removed at this point. It's this is what we call the Widows Crossing, or the Gobernador Creek Crossing. This project was completed in 2011, but as you can see, there's a road that goes through the creek. There's a giant drop off on the downstream end, and fish have no ability to get over this structure. This is also the last barrier before entering the Los Padres National Forest, which possesses a really great habitat. So this back in 2011 was a home run of a project to do. With these types of projects, you initiate engineering designs. Well, first we go through that landowner engagement process, and then we get the money, but then you go through these engineering designs, and part of the conversations with landowners and that initial engagement is what's in it for them, and sometimes it's not that I guess vain. But it is a starting point in conversation. This landowner in particular has a road that goes through the creek. It's the only way to get to his house, and we can't just go in and ask him to remove the road without providing another way for him to get to his property. So we went ahead and talked to him, and just in this photo you can see there's a footbridge placed in the trees in the background, and that's there because when in high flows, the landowner can't even cross this road to get to his house. He has to walk from the other side of the creek to get there. So we did some engineering designs to build a bridge essentially, and call it for the name of Steelhead Passage. So the landowner is getting a piece of infrastructure that's needed and expensive, and we're getting the habitat connectivity benefits that we're looking for steelhead. I think I'm going, and this is what it looks like after. So you can see that naturalized creek bed. This must be a few years after the initial project, given some of the regrowth of the re-veg. But it looks great. It's at a grade that's appropriate for steelhead to get up. The bridge is intact to this day. We'll go over that in a second, and has really provided a level of safety for the landowner, and again, our habitat connectivity goals for steelhead. This is a time lapse, but I think I'm gonna skip it because it's 5 minutes and we don't need to watch it. But essentially, it gets ripped out and put back together. But there's more things that are affecting steelhead in our areas, and this is Carp Creek as well, than just habitat connectivity. One was the drought. So we had that really extended drought a few years ago, one that really put um, pressure on the steelhead in the way that perennial waters that were always perennial were drying up. So this is a big pool up in slide A, same spot, same location, but you can see um, people are snorkeling and looking and counting for fish. It's a big enough pool to swim in, actually quite pleasant to swim in. And then on our B slide, you can see it's basically dry, but yet a puddle at the base of that big rock. So drought has been a big stressor on our watersheds in this area, especially from I think it was the 2014 to 17 drought. But then on the contrary side, we have this flooding idea. So again, this is displaying a drought type scenario where big pools where fish used to be. But also on the flip side, we have this big flooding events. So this is that same bridge. It's the Widow's Bridge. This is the post debris flow, the 1/9 post Thomas Fire, same debris flow that affected the Montecito community right after it happened. You can see there's a lot of logs that stacked up on the front or the upstream side of this bridge, plugged it, and basically denuded a lot of habitat. So this is looking down at the bridge, if you can imagine that. And during these big debris flows, like we experienced in that 1/9 event, and the same one that affected Montecito, you have an immense amount of large woody debris that pulses down the system. Well, in a natural system where there are no bridges and there's big floodplains, this disperses over bank, settles out in big floodplains, and while still fairly destructive and uh, geomorphologically changing the environment in the creeks, um, things like this infrastructure, like our bridges here, plug up with this large woody debris and create all sorts of other problems. But in our engineering design phase, we look at a lot of flood modeling to dictate what size bridges we should use to accommodate flood flows. But even our 100-year flow analysis couldn't account for something like a big debris flow that we experienced. So this is, again, looking downstream at the same bridge. Not only is the large woody debris stacked up on the bridge, with these giant floods that go over bank with tons of rock moving through them, they denude the banks and they denude the stream corridors of its vegetation. So in this picture, you can see there's no green. It's all brown. It's all mud. Some of our big trees have remained intact on the side of the banks, but really, we have this completely landscape altering event, and specific to the creeks, just completely completely altering. It's actually quite amazing how much the creek had changed because of this event. But historically, and I think Stephanie and some other hydrologists working at UCSB would attest to, is this is the landscape process that really morphs our creeks into what they are. These are the processes that really change them. And this is an overview of that same property. The bridge being at the very upper left-hand side, and the upstream going across to the right. And this is where I'll mention the debris basins. The debris basins is a structure that Santa Barbara County Flood Control has on a lot of different creeks in our South Coast. And essentially, it's a wide part in the creek. It's like it is what it sounds like. It's a big basin to which it's supposed to capture debris as it flows down in these types of events. This is the Gobernador debris basin. It's slightly different than the Montecito ones that really were affected by the flooding, in the way that there's a modified outfall structure that allows for fish passage, that really allowed for a lot of the mud to escape the debris basin and not fill it up, because this big rock pile in the middle is a earthen dam. And with that, it allowed for the capacity of all the big rocks, and I'll show you the next slide, but they're in that upper right-hand corner, to settle out before going downstream. So in this picture, just above our bridge, this is the Santa Barbara County Flood Control Basin, or debris basin. This grouted rock on the left and in the bottom of the screen is your earthen dam, but this structure in the middle is basically a low spot in the dam for water to escape. This was built in the name of fish passage. So the flood control actually initiated this project to get fish above their debris basin, which used to be an earthen barrier. But again, what it allowed to do is all that mud in the basin that you can see, that's not big rocks, was able to pulse out of that outfall structure. And then because there was not a filled in earthen dam, the rocks that you see in the behind there were not able to spill over the earthen dam like they did in Montecito. So this really saved all these rocks from coming down and going through our downstream landowners' properties. So this was a hugely successful project, and henceforth, Santa Barbara County Flood Control is working right now actually to modify the remaining of their debris basins to this Gobernador model with the slotted outfall. Again, here's that slotted outfall in the upper, in the top of the screen. You can see a log piled on the top of that. So one thing it didn't do is didn't stop all the logs from floating over the top. Logs generally float. They're not as heavy as rocks. And that's where we had all those logs in our bridge downstream of this. But you can tell the logs got pretty high up on this thing and just floated right over. And again, just to display the intensity of that event, this is the Los Padres National Forest on Carpinteria Creek. And then you see this log sitting in the tree that high up with the stadia rod held by our consultants. And I believe this was 32 feet above the stream bed. So if you can imagine 32 feet deep, Carpinteria Creek, cranking logs and rocks, this is the byproduct of that. And this is in a natural space. This is, you know, this is as natural as the creek gets, and this is the intensity that we experienced. So before I kind of get into the next part, kind of explaining how we reacted to this debris flow event in Carpinteria Creek, I just wanted to pause to see if there's any questions or clarifications that I can make. I'll take that as a keep going. So in response to this debris flow event, we wanted to do something. We surveyed the creek. It was just out of control how much had changed. And in our human nature, it's something that we want to do is remedy something that back to its natural state as fast as we can. But also, we have to check ourselves, because these are natural processes that happen and really dictate our geomorphology here in our creeks in Santa Barbara County, at least on the south coast. And so initially, Mo and I sought out some grant funding to do some fixes. And we sought that money out from the Regional Water Quality Control Board, the State Water Resources Control Board. And they initially came back to us and said, hey, we really want to help you guys out here, but we're not so certain about the projects that you've pitched us, how about this? How about you guys do a watershed assessment and a restoration plan, and we'll fund that to begin with. So we said, okay, sure. So we went ahead and we did this Carpinteria Creek watershed assessment and restoration plan, funded by the state board. It was about a $90,000 endeavor, and I looked at some critical pieces. So one, we wanted to understand the existing watershed, kind of the history, what's there, what's been done in the past, and really highlight those different areas of known knowledge and existing condition. The second component of the project was to develop a restoration plan. And this is where we went in and located site-specific projects that we could implement, and then use the technical advisory committee with a lot of natural resource agency input to prioritize those projects. And then the third part of this restoration plan, we were able to hire engineers to do conceptual level engineering designs at our high priority locations. So it really gave us 3 key pieces of information that we could use to leverage future projects. So this is Carpinteria Creek. As you know, the Thomas Fire is really what kind of kicked off the conditions for there to be a debris flow. So the red you see here is the Thomas Fire scar, and then Carpinteria Creek is outlined in the orange, the watershed, and our 2 creeks, well, I guess 2 stems of Carpinteria Creek meeting there in the middle. So on the left stem, we have Carpinteria Creek, and then on the right, we have Gobernador Canyon. And then they meet, and then they become Carpinteria Creek, flowing out near the state park to the ocean. So you can see Thomas Fire was a really big event at its time. It was the biggest California fire in recorded history. Has since been surpassed by actually quite by a lot of number of different fires. It is sad, but it's good not to hold the #1 slot anymore, I guess. And here's some, this is a graphic I put together basically just to illustrate that fires are a normal occurrence here. This is Santa Barbara, Ventura, and LA County displaying fires from 2007 to 2018. So basically 10-year period, and displaying fires that are greater than 1,000 acres. So you can see here, a lot of our area burns. It's a common thing, and somehow seems to be getting more and more frequent with climate change and human ignition points and such. But to kick off a debris flow, you also have your hydrological events. I will note that the debris flow that that we're looking at is not posted on this. It was just something kind of immeasurable, given the soupy mud and different things that were, not just water trying to be measured. So that's not on here, but this gives you an idea how variable the Carpinteria Creek hydrology can be. So we had, this was a pre-debris flow picture of Carpinteria Creek. This looks amazing, great habitat, nice cobbles, spawning gravels, great riparian vegetation. And then this was post-debris flow. So some of these are Montecito Creek and Cold Springs Creek, but it gives you an idea of these tight little corridors that were very tiny are now giant, wide, rock, muddy channels. And it's quite amazing at the size of rock that could be moved in these events. Just astonishing, really. Like 3-bed, 2-bath house size rocks were moved in this event. But that's partly because we had our denuded hill slopes. So when the fire comes through, you lose the cohesion that the vegetation provides for the hill slopes. As you can see in these pictures, none of the pictures have any sort of vegetation on them. The roots that hold all that soil together. And then on top of that, when vegetation burns in a hot fire, you have oils from the vegetation permeate the soil, and it creates a waxy hydrophobic layer, semi-impermeable to water. So when you had this big intense rainfall just after our big fire, you saw a lot of movement of mud off of hill slopes because the water was not able to penetrate and infiltrate the ground like in a normal vegetated scenario. And then you get this. You get all the mud moving down, which can create all sorts of things like debris jams and migration blockage. So there's probably not steelhead getting through this log pile. You have sedimentation issues, a lot of loss of riparian cover. So a lot of kind of localized impacts that are caused by this landscape level process. As part of our assessment, and that kind of phase one still of our assessment, we did look at habitat characterization for fish. And you can see the red zones are the really not so greats. As you get into the more dark blues, you get into some nicer habitat. This is a visual representation of that. But we also compared that to an old report done in 2002 and looked at the habitat quality by reach. So the green being the 2002 assessment, where we had fairly great habitat, and then the 2019 assessment, to which we performed generally and most reaches a bit lower. So we do have this degradation of habitat post the reflow event. And part of that fish habitat characterization is looking at the geomorphology and the channel morphology of these of this creek, of Carp Creek. And I think I got this slide from you, Steph, so I'm going to do my best to kind of explain it here. So there's this idea of different stages that creeks go through when they're morphing through their different geomorphological processes and landscape type events that really shape these types of things. So Carpinteria Creek, I would have described it as a stage one. And again, the stages represent different different looks, so to speak, for the creeks as they're going through succession through time. Typically, I mean, some have really high habitat value, some have low habitat value. Stage one, to which Carpenter Creek would be considered under a pre-debris flow stage, was great habitat. But then we go through our processes. Here's what a stage one creek would look like in my mind. Sinuous channel, lots of riparian cover, equilibrium in the channel bed as far as it aggrading or adding to the elevation, or degrading, lowering the elevation of the bed. Very much at equilibrium here, and a happy creek. But typically when you're going through these stages, whether a flood causes the catalyst for the movement through time and how these look. Stage one to stage 5, we're looking at kind of a 10-year horizon window between equilibrium and its event to be at one of those. And then as we get to the stage 6 and 7, we see that on a longer time step. Stage 8, a much longer time step. And then I would say right now, we're looking at stage 2, stage 3, stage 3S for what Carpinteria Creek looks like at the moment. So, and this would be kind of our stage, stage 2, stage 3 look here, where we have kind of a graded and degraded stream bed, depending on where you are in the watershed, denuded banks, a lot of opportunity for bank failure. The creek's in flux, basically, at this moment in time. And like I said, there's different hydrogeomorphic attributes and habitat and ecosystem benefits that are associated with each of these stages. So the smaller circles represent the percentage of which each of those benefits is related to other stages. So let's say at stage 3, for example, we're basically receiving 25% of the benefits of for habitat ecosystems, as well as for the complexity of hydrogeomorphic attributes. Whereas if you get to a stage 1 or a stage 8 or 0, something that's really reached its equilibrium, you have higher benefits for habitat, ecosystem services, and hydrogeomorphic attributes, the complexity to which the channel is exhibiting. And this is another way to illustrate that. The green areas being highly sought after as far as ecosystem benefits that you want and the hydrogeomorphic attributes that you want to see. And then the yellow being not so great. So like we had kind of indicated earlier, we were at stage 1 receiving a lot of the benefits that we were looking for, but now we're likely in this yellow zone, 2 to 3, if you will. And that's kind of where Mo and I come in and say, what can we do about it? What are manageable actions that we can take as people to catalyze us to go from that stage 2, 3, around the clock, back to that stage 1 to get to where we want to be. And you know, I think Stephanie, you would appreciate this, and Derek as well. Restoration works when the scale of the issue is matched by the scale of restoration. So depending on what you're trying to tackle, your projects are only going to mimic your benefits are only going to mimic the scale of your restoration projects. So what are manageable actions for sediment control, since we're talking about debris flows and trying to get better habitat for steelhead trout mainly? Well, the largest sediment sources are from the hill slope, up in the mountains, what's burned, and that will continue to happen until the hill slopes revegetate themselves. So is it manageable? No, it's probably not. It's just too large of a scale for labor. The access is too hard, costs too much money. So we look at, well, what are other sediment sources that we can manage? And there's storm runoff things that we can try to employ. There's bank stabilization for failing banks along the creeks. And at this scale, this is manageable. So the idea of how we approach this restoration plan for Carpinteria Creek is in this idea of what's manageable, what can we do with the manpower and the funding that we can get. And the benefits of this, well, there's plenty. There's habitat or water quality benefits, protection of infrastructure. So for example, remedying someone's bridge. There's habitat enhancement, protection of private lands. So if an avocado orchard per se is going to lose an acre or two to a bank failure, how might we be able to catalyze that stabilization in a way that is, productive for habitat, but also allows that landowner to keep some of that land. And then also, the benefits of just creating a more stable riverine system. And if we can catalyze natural processes and just give them a little nudge that they need so things start to fix themselves, that's also something that we can do. It's a manageable action. So in our restoration plan, we looked at past projects the status of those projects, and different new project recommendations. So this effort basically entailed myself, our project engineers, and a few other biologists going up the creek, just walking from start to finish, and looking at everything and saying which things are good projects and which aren't. Where can we ID things and that we can fix, and where are things that are just beyond our control. So this map just kind of highlights different projects that were highlighted as a part of the plan, but not necessarily things that we are employing at the moment. This is the upstream version of that same map. So in total, you can see in this very bottom right, we ID'd 31 project-specific, site-specific projects for Carpinteria Creek to potentially be employed, depending on their priority. So this is an example of something that we named a priority. This site in particular was one of our very first, I think the first steelhead barrier removal project that we did on Carpinteria Creek. It was formerly a road turned into a bridge, but with the flood event, a lot of the rock that you see at the bottom of towards the creek at the toe of the bank, toe slope of the bank, a lot of that large rock that you see on the upper or the higher portion of the bank is gone. So that big rock was placed there to protect the bridge and its cement and concrete footings that are down in the bank. So big floods can't basically take out the bridge. So in this particular project, we lost a lot of that rock at the bottom, and we're looking to replace that rock with some construction this year, actually. This is another one of our sites. This is a fish passage project. So interestingly, all these rocks that you see, this is looking upstream towards the bridge, so the water's coming at your computer. All these rocks basically park themselves right there, creating an impassable barrier for fish, basically as just because of a weird hydrological event with the confluence just downstream of this. But essentially, these rocks would have, I think, pulsed through the system, but they ended up parking themselves right there. And it created a fish passage barrier. So we recommended to basically take that slug of rocks and then move them to the sides, one, to stabilize the banks, but also two, to allow for more fish passage through this area. So this project's actually been completed thus far, and it looks great. Another site, this is a floodplain enhancement project. The project is taking place on the far side of the creek. At this location particularly, we had some degraded creek bed in the way that the floodplain or the water in a normal 2 to 5 year flow event would inundate or flood that floodplain, or we call it a bench, on the opposite side of the creek there from the photo. And because the reflow downcut the creek channel so much, the ability for that floodplain to be inundated with water at a regular interval was no longer really the case. So those trees that you see on the opposite floodplain bank, they're also avocado trees, so they're non-native. And we pitched to the landowner that we'd like to remove their 2 rows of avocado trees that were no longer in production for them, and lower the elevation of that floodplain bench so it could be inundated more often. And when you have those flood events inundate the floodplain, you have a dropping out of very fine particulate sediments that are kind of inhibit good spawning conditions for steelhead trout. So we're one, improving water quality for steelhead trout. We're creating a flood refuge for fish if they were to swim over the floodplain in a high flood, the water would be much slacker. So habitat for fish, and we're restoring native vegetation on the floodplain, um, and removing the avocados. So this project's actually in progress at the moment. This is kind of an engineering look at what that is. Basically, just shaving the top of that floodplain to create all those benefits. But this is also something that we see as a result of the debris flow. A lot of these creek banks have gotten ripped up and are incised and are failing and dropping. Basically, that entire bank in that top left photo is about to drop into the creek in any given moment and basically create a big slug of sediment that is going to have water quality impacts, fish impacts, and we're looking to do bank stabilization projects to remedy that. The photo in the bottom left, you can see a giant oak there. That oak fell into the creek, I think 2 days after this photo was taken. So it just displays kind of the power of these type of flood events we have, but also kind of what happens post-flood, where you have bank failures, loss of riparian habitat. And again, to reiterate, this is a natural process, and in its own, left to its own devices with no humans on the landscape, you know, this would be great things for the creek, these trees falling in it and everything like that. But we're dealing in a working landscape, so we have to accommodate private landowners in the way that, you know, benefits them, but also benefits nature. So we walk this fine line of trying to initiate projects that are important, but also projects that are conscientious and respectful of working landscapes. You know, these are mostly agricultural communities that we're working on, and it's their livelihood, generational livelihood for a lot of folks. So we you know, walk that fine line. And then again, this is that same bridge that we've been looking at almost all night, with the logs now removed. But you can see in that top left corner, the creek banks are near vertical. It doesn't allow for lots of flood capacity, flow capacity to go under the bridge. And like some of the other bridges, a lot of the rock has been removed that protect the bridge at its concrete footings. So we are looking to do a bank stabilization project and kind of bridge protection project at this location as well. And that's what this kind of engineering design looks like. So before I go on to the next kind of portion of my talk, what happened after we produced this report and produced these engineering designs for 6 specific locations, the State Water Board asked us to apply again for implementation funds to implement our projects that we had vetted, that we had identified, and we were able to obtain about $800,000 from the State Water Resources Control Board. And we are currently in construction on all 6 projects in Carpinteria Creek right now. Our contractor's been out there last week, and he's out there this week again. And we look forward to getting those done. And it really just highlights the idea that you can, you know, go through this idea of planning, stakeholder engagement, natural resource agency engagement, and landowner engagement, and come up with a plan that is vetted. Everyone's on the same idea, has the same idea what's going to happen, understands all the benefits, and you can really garner that support and move it forward with implementation, which is the end goal, to restore the habitats. And that's where we are now. I'm going to move through this next one really quick because I'm realizing it's almost 8 o'clock. But this was touched on last Creek Week by Mo. This was another really big project for us. It was the Davy Brown Munch Creek Fish Passage Project. It opened about 3 miles of habitat for steelhead. It's in the Los Padres National Forest, way up Big Mountain. It was funded by heaps of people. It took about 10 years to get done, and it cost about $4 million with the support of all these people. And I'm just going to flip through these pretty quickly here, but this is where the project location is. Give you a general idea where that is. If you've ever been out to the Naira or Manzana Schoolhouse, this is right on the way. Naira Campground, Davy Brown Campground. It was fairly on the outside of the Zacafire Scar. It's Munch Creek, which flows into Davy Brown Creek, which flows into Manzana Creek, and then the Sisquoia. The little red markers are where the actual project sites are, where they were at grade road crossings. So this is a road going across Munch Creek, and this is it naturalized. No bridge built here, just naturalization of the creek. Davy Brown Trail, going down to the project location right there at a Davy Brown campground. And then we had these at grade road crossings. Here's the Upper Sunset Valley Road. And now here it is with a bridge. So before and after. And then here's what it looks like underneath the bridge. And then the lower Davy Brown project. So again, at grade road crossing, stream flows going away from you from right to left. And here it is with a bridge. And here it is underneath the bridge. So this was a really big project. It took tons of coordination. It's really remote, but it takes an hour and a half or so to get there from here in Santa Barbara to town. So we were really, really proud of this project. It took about 9 months of shutting the forest down to get to this point. And it's definitely one of our biggest projects to date as an organization. And quick wildlife photos of what's back there. We got all sorts of things. That's an owl. And then we have, it's going to be 3 photos. We're going to go from, there's a skunk there at the top right, but there's a mountain lion in the bottom right, stalking it right there. Great blue heron, bobcat in the bottom left, big old bear, another mountain lion, and then, of course, a giant steelhead here at the end of the project, celebrating the accomplishment of finishing. And then lastly, just 2 more slides, I swear, just punching in on future projects. We're working really hard with Caltrans and a couple other funders to try to do some barrier removal on Gaviota Creek. It's one of those projects, again, it's been taking probably a couple decades to get the momentum to get it done, but we're at a point now where I think these are going to come out, about 5 barriers near the Gaviota Tunnel are going to come out in the next 5 years. So that's really, really great news. And then South Coast Habitat Restoration also just basically what we were awarded and funded by a few different funders, WCB and CDFW, for almost to the tune of about $5 million to remove 4 barriers in Wheeler Gorge Campground on the Ventura River, replacing 2 of those barriers with 2 bridges. So in summary, South Coast, we do a lot of barrier removal work. We're probably up to 25 or so removed. We're probably working on 20 plus other fish barriers, whether it's engineering designs, scoping, conceptual, permitting. About 40 miles of steelhead migration or habitat we've opened up for steelhead migration, as well as about 14 bridges installed for private landowners and 2 for public, that being the Forest Service. And then, just a couple other stats that kind of sums up how we've been doing as an organization and carrying through. But, thank you for listening. I know it was quite a mouthful at times, and I hope it didn't confuse you too much, but this is the world of creek restoration that we're living in, and we're hoping to bring the steelhead back to live with us too. So that is it. Happy to answer any questions people may have as well.
Hi, thank you so much, Jason. That was very educational. I appreciate that. I just was wondering, what's going on with Mission Creek, especially Upper Mission Creek?
Yes. So this is maybe one of the one creeks we don't play too much of a hand in. The city has a City Creeks division, and they typically take the lead on creek restoration projects within city limits. So Mission Creek, Las Positas Creek, um, the Bird Refuge, and Lighthouse Creek, and a couple other ones I think I'm missing, but that's kind of their playground to play with. Sometimes we do partner and collaborate, but I'm not exactly sure what's going on at Upper Mission Creek. Although I think I heard through the grapevine there's potential for that barrier next to the Rocky Neck Park to come out soon.
Great. Jason,
Thank
Liz
you.
has a question on chat. How many steelhead have been seen in Carp Creek in recent years?
This is the killer. So there was the last anadromous run fish to be seen in Carp Creek, I believe, was 2009 or 2010. Ocean going fish, really big old steelhead. I think there was 3 that year. And then since that time, up until the debris flows, there was a very healthy and strong population of resident steelhead trout. So these are just, again, rainbow trout before they have the potential to go out to the ocean. And the debris flow, after the debris flow happened, we have not seen one. So we just don't think there are any fish in the system right now. Although there has been recent, there's been a recent, I guess, action plan committee developed for Southern California steelhead trout that South Coast is participating on, that's looking at how to translocate, and I say this with a lot of hesitation because it's all being developed right now, but how to translocate and fish that are in dire jeopardy of being, say, dried out by creek conditions or different environmental things that may happen that might affect their, status of population in the creek. So there's some talks with agency personnel, different stakeholders, looking at what do we do because there's no fish anymore, and there's only a couple really stronghold populations in our South Coast area, but there's lots of habitat that have been opened up. Carpinteria Creeks is just the best example because it's hosts some of the best habitat. All the work that's been done as far as migration barriers are gone. So how do we manage that, and how do we cut through a lot of red tape associated with that? So it should be interesting to see where that goes. It'll probably be years before there's an actual action plan in place, but we'll see where it goes. Eddie?
Yeah, Jason, am I understanding also that there are no resident rainbow trout?
Correct. No resident rainbow trout in Carp Creek right now.
And I think it's always important to recognize that when you do restoration, you seldom do, even though the funding might come for a particular species, usually you do restoration for all species, for the habitat that we don't really understand, the specific needs. We fix the habitat, and in the hopes that all of these things working together, like if the trees grow, they'll drop the allochthonous materials. If they can create a vibrant aquatic and vertebrate community, then that's part of it. But you create habitat.
Like how much do we want to play God?
Right, exactly.
I want to just put the pieces there for things to happen and hope they happen.
Exactly.
But yeah, we'll. I think it's a good ethical question of like how much do you want to play God? And these fish have been here for a really, really long time. Time steps that we have not really been around for as long. So, are we being hurried and rushed to try to remedy this thing that may just happen through time, or is it something that's really dire? And that's a question it's hard to parse out because our mental framework of time step is a little bit different than evolutionary biology.
Right.
Cameron?
Thank you, Jason. I have so many things rushing through my head right now. First of all, great presentation. Thank you. That was really thorough and excellent. You guys are doing fabulous work. So thank you for that as well. And Stephanie, yeah, of course. I mean, everything's connected to everything else, and you want to have all those pieces, all those pieces together. So you're looking at this kind of thing from an ecological perspective, not necessarily the single species. And I know you guys are thinking like that, even though steelhead's a good indicator and a good target, because it does involve all of those things. And in terms of playing God, as you said, or trying to rush things, I can understand that perspective, but I think that just the photos of the crossings and all the things that we've done to create those barriers, and the status of steelhead right now demands the urgency of trying to address those things, particularly the barriers. It's been rough for steelhead, no doubt, over the last decade plus, just because of drought. First, primarily major drought, and then the massive fires we've had, the debris flow. I mean, those pictures that you had in your presentation, I never get used to seeing that. I mean, it's so incredibly dramatic, and the fact that your bridge held up under that kind of strain was unbelievable. I was interested to hear your comments about what I call the shark fin design on the debris basin, and how that functioned. I'd like to, I guess one question I have is just how or whether any kind of monitoring has been done in the field to determine how effective that might be, or might have been, or might be in the future with just velocities and drops and things like that in terms of passage. And then just on a hopeful note, steelhead have a life history that is that creates the possibility for us to have hope for them, in the sense of, being anadromous and being able to weather these kind of events, even long term, such as a drought, and be able to survive in the ocean. And then when things turn around, or we have fresh water available, to be able to come back out of the ocean and reproduce. So that's a hopeful thing. And so I'd like to hear more thoughts about that design, because I think flood control is going forward. They really love debris basins. My opinion is they're not ideal situations, but I'd like to hear more about that, how that's functioned. And then just to quickly answer the question about Mission Creek, Liz, I was glad Liz asked the question about what's happening with Steelhead and Carp Creek. I guess another question I have is what's happening throughout the county. If what you can tell us about what you know about steelhead or resident trout sightings. And Mission Creek's about the same timing, although by 2009 we had 8 out of 10 years with adult steelhead coming up from the ocean, in 8 out of 10 years in a row, where we actually had steelhead trying to make it upstream and unable to. And in the upper watershed, a lot of that's outside the city boundary. That Rocky Neck Park area and that bridge is identified as a fairly significant barrier, and that bridge is under study by the city's public works department, and there's all these negotiations between the city and the county about who owns that bridge. And so it's really complicated because of it being a historic bridge. We've done a lot of fish passage downstream, but upstream there are some other barriers we're looking at. There's one where with an abandoned water line up Rattlesnake Creek that we're looking at, and we actually have built into our capital program for some future years to remove that. Las Canoas Road. There's the bridge there. It's created a barrier. So there's still some in the upper watershed, and we at the city would be interested in partnering with the county or the Forest Service or the Flood Control District in any of those efforts. And so, so that's a lot of comments. I've got so many things I'm thinking of. Oh, the last question for you also. So I think three-part question is what it looks like now post, I think it was 2018 was the debris flow. I don't know. I didn't see if there were any current photos, but we watched very carefully the impacts of the wildfire and subsequent sedimentation and things like that after the T fire and after the Hesacita fire. And we saw pools fill up and extirpated resident trout fill up with sediment, but then they were scoured out in subsequent years and restored almost to the pre-fire condition. I wonder, the debris flow is so dramatic. I don't know if you've experienced the same thing.
Yeah, a lot to digest there, but I think I got the 3 points you're looking for. As far as flood control's design, I don't want to speak on behalf of flood control. What I witnessed at Gerbernador, and I think what was kind of displayed in some of the, here, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen again just to show a quick picture. Okay, so here's the picture of where the rock dropout is. You can see basically they're all in a line. They really didn't make it past a certain point into the basin. And similarly on the aerial, you can see a pretty distinct line. As soon as the creek channel's width got wide enough and the depth decreased and the velocities decreased, you had this fallout of rocks. As far as what I can tell, that design is really worked really well, and it's worked well for fish passage as well. They did experience a little bit of damage to the structure on the downstream end of the slot, where their kind of concreted grouted pools were that allow for the jump heights to get above the basin right there. They've since forth fixed it, and it looks good now. And they've also been doing their pilot channels, so they create a little stream channel through their basin, so the water doesn't just spread out like a lake and go flat through the basin. Rather, they keep it confined in a channel through the basin, and they've been doing a better job and good work on keeping that pilot channel passable, to a lack of a better word, but just more, it's a little more engineered, but like it looks nice, and it holds the water well, and it's not just fanning out into the basin anymore. So I would say the slotted outfall works great. It definitely saved all those rocks from coming down, and the Carpinteria Creek scenario. I know there's things like the Randall Road debris basin is a different idea of what a debris basin might look like, where it's more like a floodplain type of model that is really yet to be tested in our area. But it seems like the slotted outfall ones are the ones you want to go for, at least in my very, very minuscule engineering mind. The benefit, it just seemed like it worked well. As far as what are the steelhead, we have some stronghold populations. I'd say the Goleta Slough complex, without outing any one creek in particular, is a good stronghold resident population of trout. You see them in a lot of the different headwaters, and there's big pools up there. And County Flood Control has also just removed entirely, so no shark fin, no slotted outfall design, 2 debris basins on Maria Ignacio Creek on the west and the east branches. So those have since forth completely come out, as well as, with that, there was I believe a few road crossings that came out with those as well that were used for maintenance on those structures. So that looks great. And there's some really nice stronghold populations in those areas. And then I think I would say the Gaviota Creek has a nice resident population of trout. So there's those are, I say, are our big strongholds, like Goleta Slough and Gaviota Creek. although there's a couple other ones that have not great numbers, but they're there. So which is, reassuring, because especially for steelhead, the research has been showing a lot lately is this idea of stray. So fish don't always go to their natal stream, or steelhead don't always go to their natal stream. They may go to adjacent or quasi-adjacent watersheds based on conditions. And they've been studying this in Santa Cruz with Scott Creek and Waddell Creek as it relates to, I think, the CZU fire. So they've seen some stray in those areas, as well as on the Big Sur coast. So it's not to say a Gaviota Creek steelhead couldn't go to Carp Creek. I mean, maybe that's a little larger of a distance. Let's say Goleta Slough steelhead couldn't come up Carp Creek if the conditions were better in Carp Creek. It's not out of the realm of possibility. And then, what was the last question? I lost it.
Just how you've seen how it's come back since.
Oh yes,
2018.
yeah. Carp Creek looks great. Honestly, it was like this hurry up and do something type of thought right after the post the reflow. But as of right now, it looks really good. Like as far as re-veg has happened, basically all the banks are revegetated with natural native species. Granted, a lot of the big trees have gone, but you're seeing this like kind of level succession where initially there was a couple really dominant species like Canyon sunflower. If you've been on the hikes in Montecito, you saw it everywhere, and stuff like that. But now you're seeing more biodiverse type of succession going on. And as far as sediment filling in with pools and that sort of stuff, the first couple of years you could see the sediment just slugging down in pulses. I think a lot of it was probably still coming off the hill slopes because vegetation on the hill slopes wasn't there yet. But also just in the channel itself, you could see these pulses come down, fill in pools, and then slowly but surely, some of the pools have been carved out again. Although I would say that there's still that slug of sediment moving downstream. So it's not there yet as far as these nice cobbly big pool type of features, but it's getting there, which is a positive sign. Anne, you had a question?
Yeah, so on the Urban Creeks Council, we've been working on this program called the Creek Stewardship Program to get people that live near creeks more engaged with protecting the creeks. And sometimes when I've mentioned that to people, they've said something like, well, how can I help get the steelhead back to my creek? And I was just wondering if, from your point of view, if there were any actions that you think are most important for those people to take to help get the steelhead back to their creek?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because a lot of what we do is work with those private landowners a lot of times to try to enhance their habitats on their creek. Sometimes it's a matter of setting, I would say, like say in Montecito, you have a bunch of different landowners. While they have big properties, they're not like acres and acres and acres of creekside property per se. So the engagement level of, say, Mo and I trying to engage with 2, 3, 4, 5 landowners all in a row to enhance one big section of creek, that gets a bit challenging. But I think one, just education that these people have this resource back in their backyards is a big one, because I mean, you'd be astonished at how many people realize they don't, or that they don't know that like steelhead, like a salmon, and you say a salmon, people go, what? Comes up these tiny little creeks. So I think like kind of the educational component's really important for people who just have no idea but want to care. And then any sort of like stakeholder engagement that you can produce. So it's one thing to engage a landowner on a one-on-one basis, but it's one other thing to like the Urban Creek Council, you have this mechanism to bring people together in a more conversational setting at a table. And then that's where I think you might get the idea or the support for maybe say multiple landowners to do like a cross-property type of project. It's proven pretty difficult, I'm not gonna lie, but it's not out of the realm of possibility. I'd also say if landowners along the creeks are using lots of water, water efficiency is a really good way to kind of develop this idea of stewardship as well. And it's not maybe just water efficiency. Well, water efficiency has to do with timing too. So timing of that water efficiency is also really critical for the biological components for steelhead particularly. So that's what kind of is coming to mind, but something that we're still working on as well. Lewis?
Yeah, thanks again for the great presentation. My question for you is if somehow this massive funding source materialized and you could pick any 5 creeks on the South Coast region for improvements that would bring steelhead back, what would be those 5 creeks?
Unlimited money, you say? I think Gaviota Creek has a lot of potential for a really big estuary enhancement project. In my personal take on it is I think there's, and it's very political and very convoluted, but I think if you were to relocate the campground to the wind caves or by that area, and then basically restore that estuary to its kind of natural historic state, while still accommodating day use for parking and stuff for people to come down to the beach and that such. I think Gaviota Creek could be like the quintessential Santa Barbara South Coast steelhead creek, given it's always has water. Even in the summer of all these droughts, it always has water. There's tons of fish in it. The estuary is the biggest on the South Coast, and it's just a very natural setting. There's only about 6 landowners in the watershed, and 2 of them are state parks and the U.S. Forest Service. And then I think 90% of the lands are in conservation easements if they're private. So there's really a lot at play that could benefit Gaviota Creek. But you have things like the Hollister Ranch access thing going on. State parks is a pretty bureaucratic beast to deal with, and then Caltrans as well is also a pretty bureaucratic beast to deal with. Not impossible, but those are some pretty big hurdles that you have to get over, along with the politics associated with them. The other couple creeks is, I think DP or Dos Pueblos Creek has a ton of potential to house steelhead, given that unlimited dollar mark. And then I would say if somehow we could get that San Jose flood control channel and out of the Goleta Slough figured out, I think all the creeks that feed into the Goleta Slough complex are also our bread and butter as far as talking about stray and estuary size and that sort of thing. I think that's a big one as well. Oh, I have 2 more, right? Carp Creek and let's give Arroyo Hondo some love because they just went through the fire. And it's in a land trust. Gotta love protected lands. Cameron?
Yeah, thanks. Jason, I love that Gaviota idea. I know that's been kicked around for at least 20 years or so, maybe more. But hey, unlimited money is one thing. I've never seen anybody even get to the stage of a feasibility type study on that and determine whether there was sufficient space up where you're talking about for camping,
No
placement, things
campground
like
stuff
that.
no campground stuff has been done. There's been 2 feasibility studies as far as the estuary's potential for restoration and what it looks like in a historic context, what it could look like, what are some options. And then there was a feasibility study to relocate the entrance road to the state park and into the ranch done by Caltrans in a deal negotiated with state parks when they did that widening, that curve widening as you go down there. So one of the mitigation things that was done for Caltrans is widening up that curve before you hit the tunnel. Is they did two conceptual level designs on how they would relocate the entrance road at the state parks facility. So basically trying to get the road out of the floodplain where it is now. That road always floods, if you're familiar, and created a bridge, put it over a point of the creek that's narrower, and use the existing utilities road on the other in that hill slope cut towards the back over there. So there's been a few things. There's also been a couple stakeholder groups discussing all these. And there's some consultants that are doing this type of work in other areas like McGrath State Park down south, is basically getting the same revamp idea of the campground relocation, albeit it's kind of come to a bit of a political halt, funding halt, which is kind of like the worry. But like all the bones are there. Some people have done some stuff up north in like San Mateo, Santa Cruz area. So it's not to say it's impossible. It's definitely a heavy lift. And it's, we're putting on the timescale for kind of state parks, because this would go through a general plan update, which is a 10-year thing for them. So
Well, Lewis took the
that's
funding
right.
obstacle off the table, so it's only the political obstacle that remains. Last question I had, back to the debris basin, all those large boulders fell out, but now what happens with them? They're in the debris basin. Is flood control going to go break big ones into little ones, or are they being relocated? I mean, those are all now not going to end up being part of the creek structure below that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's a good point. I don't know exactly what flood control has done with them. I know that some of them have remained in the basin themselves, and more at the back of the basin towards kind of the naturalized area. Although they've cleaned out a channel, so there's actual channel that goes through those big mounds of boulders now.
Yeah, I could speak to that.
There's the man. Yeah.
So,
can you guys hear me?
thanks.
Yeah. We actually, so we have cleared out a bunch of that actually there today, and we're reestablishing the pilot center there. But with all that rock that was in the back of the basin, basically we cleared out a lot of it through multiple efforts post debris flow, and what was left there, we've created an actual creek channel in that, and it's actually the upper part where those rocks are is the most stable channel now, and it looks really good. It's passable. And so, yeah, we leave it like that so we can reestablish that, because with that modification, what we like to do is keep a natural creek channel through there in order to help pass sediment through that, so we don't have to clean it out. It helps us to keep that natural channel in there. So many years after the debris flow, I think we cleaned out all those basins at least 3 times from 19 to 18 to 21. So big efforts there. And I think, like Jason said, we're in the process of modifying Romero Basin right now. So that's almost complete. It'll be similar to that.
Thank you, Seth. Where did the boulders go? Did they remove from the system, gone out to landscaping?
Unfortunately, most of them went to like rock quarries in Santa Paula. Let's see if I can get my and that. So yeah, unfortunately, they get removed out of the system most of the time because it's emergency clearing, and they go to wherever we'll take them. And a lot of them went to Santa Paula. There was the Buell Fat Quarry up in Buellton. A lot of rock went up there. So yeah,
okay.
Unfortunately, that's the case.
Lewis?
I have a 2-part question. The first part is for Cameron, and the second part is for Seth. And that is, again, the massive grant falls in your lap, and you can pick any one creek, Cameron in the city of Santa Barbara, and then followed by Seth, you picking any creek in the county that you would throw a whole bunch of money into to get Steelhead back.
Well, in the city of Santa Barbara, the primary Steelhead Creek is Mission Creek. So it's and we've done a lot of work within the city limits. There are still some potential to improve barriers and lower Mission Creek within the city limits. I mentioned a couple things up above that, but like Jason mentioned, estuaries and the coastal lagoons that have been largely wiped out up and down California have not totally survived in Santa Barbara. And so so improvements to the Mission Creek Lagoon, the size of that lagoon has shrunk dramatically. Where the old Estero used to be a really large estuary. So that system came down Mission Creek and wrapped around on the beach and went back up Laguna and created a large wetland. I mean, those are incredible assets and resources to have for steelhead as part of their life cycle. I mean, I've heard some of the fish biologists that I've heard speak about this think that they're really essential at increasing the likelihood of survival for fish making the transition from freshwater into marine environments, because you can get into that brackish water environment and they may be able to live there and eat and get larger and also start to acclimate to the salinity. So you've got Mission Creek there. Interestingly, on the city-county boundary over on Arroyo Burro, you have the similar situation to Gaviota, where there's a big parking lot placed in what was a large estuary there before. We don't have a lot of historic detail on steelhead in Arroyo Burro. We've only come across a few old timers who have recollections of them, but no photographs like we have for Mission Creek. So there is a possibility there might be some level of design on where the Mission Creek mouth at the ocean and back into Laguna Channel where the tide gates are and things like that to make improvements that could benefit steelhead.
All right, I'll take this. A good thing that you asked Jason that, because I was actually thinking about that while he was answering. So if my number one creek that I see promised in Santa Barbara County, I would choose Maria Ignacio Creek. We've got some significant barriers downstream that I think are not that big of a deal. I see the Patterson Bridge and even the UPRR. I know that Jason and Mo have some plans in the works for Patterson, but I see some potential for like some rough and rock ramps to get over those in the interim. And I know that historically, when we have seen steelhead in the last couple of years, they've been in Maria Ignacio and they've been stuck at UPRR or that Patterson crossing. The Cathedral Oaks crossing is the bear, I think. But there is a lot of habitat upstream. Jason helped me move a lot of fish upstream when we did a basin modification to Maria Ignacio a couple years ago. So I see that would be if I was going to do something right away, that's what I would choose in Maria Ignacio.
Yeah, I'd iterate that as well. And like Seth had said, we've been working to produce engineering designs at, I think there's 6 locations that have barriers. And we have a funding proposal into CDFW right now to address the lowermost one, which is the Patterson barrier, which is a modification basically to the channel and some of the grouted cement underneath the bridge to accommodate passage there. And then we're going to try to start chipping them off as they come. But I think to get all those barriers out of Maria Ignacio, it's probably to the tune of $15 to $20 million. As prices are consistently raising every year. I think the Patterson Bridge proposal was about $2.1 million. So we're hoping to get that money and get that started and probably put the use 2024 if we can get our ducks in a row and get the money.
Yeah, and going back to that real quick, I talked to Jason and Mo. I was bummed going back to the rock, taking the rock out of the basins a couple years ago. We had some great opportunities. If we could have, it would have taken a miracle to do that, but all this rock that was going places, we could have taken that to some of these sites on Maria Ignacio and at least done temporary barrier passage projects. But just the hoops you have to jump through to do that, it just would not have ever happened. But I just saw that as an incredible missed opportunity, unfortunately, that we couldn't do something like that to help out.
Seth, can I jump in? Was that a permitting related opportunity or a funding related opportunity?
It would have been. It would
Red
have been a
tape.
permitting, more permitting, I think, and just the logistics to get it done. I mean, to me, it's just like a pipe dream of like, we had all that rock that was going off site. It's all, fantastic stream bed material. The UPRR and also Patterson, you could put a rough and rock ramp in there. It's a temporary, not temporary, but it could be permanent, but you're just basically putting stream of material in there. I think it would just the time it would have taken to go through the regulatory process, which would not have happened. It would have been something that would have been agreed upon, within that day or week, to say, hey, yeah, we can do this. This rock is going off site. Let's take some of it here and get this done. It wouldn't have been hard to do it. It would have just taken a huge collaborative effort to get that all done.
Yeah, it's not like you have the capacity as an organization to try to jump through those hoops while you're dealing with an emergency situation. So yeah, like you said, if there was a pre-plan, an action plan, so to speak, then the opportunity may present itself. But
yeah, and that's something, that's a great idea. Maybe that's something we could work on in the future, to where when we, we still have these basins, if we're cleaning basins out, rather than, if we have large enough substrate, we could look at implementing some projects down the road, kind of like a beacon type deal. Where they have their long-term beach nourishment stuff. We could do some fish passage projects.
I think that's a fantastic idea. And Jason, if that's something you guys ever have the time, and maybe there's some grant funding that Lewis keeps bringing up, unlimited funding, if you guys could be funded to do that kind of setup. I mean, I don't see one of the things that's really challenging in this kind of work is you're doing restoration activities, but the regulatory agencies, they actually seem to go harder on you than if you're doing some kind of development near the stream. And so I don't know whether they'd be willing to grant you some sort of, advance permit, but we know for a fact that these debris basins are going to keep catching that type of debris. And I understand, flood control has a mission, and having those giant house size or 3-bedroom, 2-bath house size boulders down in the creek in the lower, those would historically change the flow of the creek completely. And now we've got cities down in those areas. So you got work to do. I'm not criticizing it. I'm just, acknowledging that it does change, but the smaller material is super valuable. And so I can just say, from the city of Santa Barbara perspective, we've had internal discussion about, what could we at the Creeks Division do to help facilitate that, even if it's trying to identify a location of some property to buy and be able to store that material while we get those permits in hand. So, but there are several pieces that fit together. So if you identify the areas that could use them, and you kind of try to at least get yourself teed up for permitting once the flows are in the flows are right and everything, and you can add material to the creek, just a place to hold it might be beneficial. And there may be a way to partner with that, and I would certainly be interested in continuing that discussion.
Yeah, I can tell you a storage spot. We've looked in that at storage for years, and like on the South Coast is incredibly difficult to find anything. You can't do anything in the coastal zones. You got to get permits from the Coastal Commission if you have any sort of storage in the coastal zone. And we've tried to buy properties before, and it hasn't. That's one of our biggest issues, and that came to the forefront after the debris flow, for sure, when we didn't have anywhere to really put anything.
Yeah, well, Tom asked everybody, so I'm not, like you said, not criticizing. It's just now's the time, when the sun is shining. Now's the time to make the plan.
Yep, definitely.
Lewis,
this is another one for Jason. Just there's the big debris basin fish passage project is happening at Romero. I'm not sure if this is for you or Seth, but what about below that, like from the ocean all the way up to the debris basin in Romero Canyon? Is that something that has potential for steelhead to get through? Because it looks pretty rough to me.
No, that's a nightmare. It's 100% total barriers. going up there.
Yeah, it's pretty
Um,
brutal up there.
Yeah, so we are. I mean, we're taking out the Romero barrier, but it's absolutely 100% not passable below that. There's probably, gosh, at least 10 sort of check structure through there. One of them being right at the 192 that Caltrans just repaired, which is a massive barrier. And there's probably 10 of those going upstream that were put in as part of, I think, part of the Army Corps Romero response. I think that's how that got in there.
Yeah, I think Army Corps did that.
But
In
the
the
only good
60s.
thing, I mean, the good thing I can say about with the Romero modification, and there's also upstream of the basin, there's the same issue as well. The check structures go all the way upstream too, past that. But we will restore some sort of sediment transport. So that will be a benefit of this project, of the Romero project. And that'll actually be done. We're actually kind of finishing that up. That should be done within the next month or two. We're going to start building the pilot channel through the basin next week or the week after that. And then we also have next year, hopefully, getting back to the permitting stuff. The permitting stuff for us is incredibly time consuming. Lots of effort goes into that. So to actually see these projects get built is very rewarding. But next year we're hoping to modify Cold Springs and also San Ysidro. So those will be huge if we can do those next year as well.
Awesome, guys. Well, thank you so much for all the great questions. It's nice to get together with a couple creek heads and talk shop for a bit. But thank you so much for your time and allowing me the opportunity to speak with you guys. I really enjoyed it.